We want standardization. The reason why I can take a copper Ethernet cable such as this, which has a RJ45 connector. Now, we won't get into the details. It's actually got a different name, but most of us refer to this as an RJ45 connector. I want to be able to take this and plug it into an HP laptop, plug it into a Toshiba laptop, plug it into an Asus laptop. We won't worry about pronunciations for now, but the moral of the story is I can take this cable and plug it into different laptops because this interface has been standardized and different vendors have agreed to create their equipment to the specification or to the standard. That makes life a lot easier. In the old days, vendors just did what they wanted to. They developed their own protocols and their own specifications, which wasn't good for customers. It was great for the vendor because if you bought their equipment, you were locked into that vendor. We don't want that as a customer. As a customer, we want to be able to buy equipment from different vendors, and they should all be able to work together. So because of standardization and because of the industry agreeing on specific models, this cable can plug into different vendor devices without any problems. We take that for granted today, but it was not always the case. Now, the first thing I want you to realize is, and you probably know this already, nothing in life is as simple as it seems. And people often have different viewpoints and debate often very heatedly about what is right and what is wrong. Don't get stuck in those debates. For the CCNA exam, just know that there are different models, different viewpoints, but there's one model that you need to know for the exam. For the real world, have your opinion and go with your opinion. There were different competing groups that were clashing about what was important and which protocols should win, the so-called protocol wars. So we had the OSI group with their protocols, we had the TCP/IP group with their protocols. TCP/IP is one basically. So for a long time we used the so-called OSI model to discuss TCP/IP protocols, but the TCP/IP protocols is what we use in the real world. We use IP version 4, we use TCP, we use UDP, we use IP version 6, TCP UDP once again. We use IP protocols in the real world. So there's this disconnect, if you like, between the OSI model and the protocols that are actually used in the real world. So now, in the new version of the CCNA, we have what is called, if you like, a hybrid model or a combined model of OSI and TCP/IP model. So don't get confused. There was originally a 4-layer TCP/IP model. We have a 7-layer OSI model, but now we've ended up, in summary, with a 5-layer TCP/IP model, 5 layers, but we refer to the top layer as layer 7 because it originated from the OSI model. So I'm going to talk about some of the details now, but in summary, make sure that when you study for the exam, you understand that there's a TCP/IP model, but today we talk about 5 layers instead of the original 4 layers that were discussed in the original RFC or request for comments. Requests for comments are a way that people discuss new protocols and agree on what a protocol should be. A protocol is basically a way to communicate. So if I'm communicating with you in English, we've agreed a certain way to communicate. If I suddenly switch to another language and say, "Hoe gaan het vandaag?" you won't necessarily understand what I'm saying because that language uses a different communication stack, if you like, or a different way to communicate versus English. We have to agree on the protocol or language that we're going to discuss. So RFCs allow us to agree on what protocol will be implemented by different vendors so that it's kind of standardized. In the old days, we didn't have standardized protocols. Every vendor did what they wanted, but that was a total mess because you had different networks that couldn't communicate with each other. These days, we want to have one network, such as the internet, that allows us all to communicate with one another. And that works because we've agreed on standards in the industry. So different vendors, Cisco, HP, Juniper, etc., will create equipment that can talk to each other based on a standard. So in summary, you need to know TCP/IP model, which today consists of 5 models for this current CCNA, reflects the real world more than, say, previous models. We have the OSI model, which consists of 7 layers. Don't get hung up on the individual layers. and I'm going to show you this practically using Packet Tracer, understand how the layers work. You may get questions saying, okay, so at which layer of the OSI model do you find HTTP, which is a protocol used for surfing the internet? If you go to a website such as facebook.com, you'll be using HTTP. Actually, today it's HTTPS, which is encrypted HTTP. It's more secure. That is an example of what we would call a layer 7 protocol. But you also need to understand in networking that we'll discuss devices such as hubs, and we'll say hubs are layer 1 devices. Hubs aren't really used today, but I'm going to discuss them just to give you an understanding, because when you use a wireless network, things kind of change with Wi-Fi 6 or the latest release of Wi-Fi. But previously, everything acted as a pure hub in the air. In other words, only one person could communicate at a time. Wi-Fi is still like a hub because it's a shared medium. The air is shared. So you need to understand the principles of hubs, even though we don't use them physically today, as in connecting cables to a hub. But the air in wireless networks is kind of like a hub. We have switches, which are called layer 2 devices. Actually, some people would debate whether switches are a thing, but we won't get into that. We have bridges, which are layer 2 devices. We have routers, which are layer 3 devices. And we have what are called layer 3 switches. So notice I'm using terms here: layer 1 device, layer 2 device, layer 3 device. We have a layer 4 protocol, which could be TCP or UDP. And then we have layer 7 applications, such as HTTP, FTP, TFTP, Telnet, SSH, etc. Don't get hung up on those. You need to know those protocols. You need to know where they fit in the so-called TCP IP model or OSI model. It'll come to you as we do a whole bunch of labs, and I'm going to show you the protocols practically in Packet Tracer. You'll see where those different protocols reside, or sit, if you like, in the model.